convening the board meeting in order to embark upon what's probably the most important item today. I think it's very clear to people why the outcome of this consultation on our future workforce is so important. It is vital to our ability as an organisation to carry on serving the public, and it is of the greatest importance to the lives of our individual staff members. So that makes it absolutely fundamental and a difficult topic to address. So the way that we're going to do it is that Keith Gate, who's Chief Operating Officer, is going to make a presentation summarising the recommendations. And then before we have the conversation, I'm going to invite representatives of our staff to speak for a short time to make their statements. I mean, this, as we know, is the culmination of a lengthy and detailed process. I've already mentioned that the board has had a seminar on this particular subject already, but of course that also has only been a very small element of what has been a really comprehensive process. And we've also got Mike Daly in the room, who's I believe the author of the paper and able to help us with any of the detail we might need. So, Keith, would you like to start us off, please?
Oh, well, actually, Roger's going to set the scene for us all before we get into the body of the presentation.
So it's Roger, Keith, Gary, Maria, Sandra, and then a board conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. All I wanted to do was make a couple of clarifications on the paper itself. I chaired a National Joint Partnership Forum meeting last Thursday, which was after the paper had been distributed. And there were one or two areas that I agreed that we would clarify in the paper itself. So if I could just take you first of all to paragraph 6.2.6. Management's position was that they thought that because management needed discretion over the timing of breaks, that was a matter that wasn't agreed. But actually, staff side were able to confirm that breaks paragraph is part of the agreement and not one of the areas that isn't agreed.
So that's 6.2.6 breaks.
6.2.6. On the other hand, there are two points in 6.1, which is the area of agreement, where management thought they'd reached agreement and staff side were clear last week that they hadn't. I just thought we ought to be clear about that as well. And those 2 points were that staff should be available to take calls up to the end of their shift. Management's position was that they thought that because we had moved to counting all the minutes after the end of the shift, that staff side had agreed not to have reflection time, that 10 minutes. But that's not the case, so that is still an area of disagreement. I just wanted to make sure that
it was inconsistent in the paper.
Yeah, so make sure that was the board were clear that that's still an area of disagreement. And then the third is also in 6.1, but it's more of an issue of clarification than disagreement, and it's the one next to the end, and it's fixed shift patterns will be replaced by roster options. Now, where this emerges from is in the debate that we've been having about standard working practices, which is a significant part of the changes that we've been proposing. We agreed with staff side that certain standard working practices would be replaced by the roster options framework. But staff side wanted me to make it clear that that doesn't mean that they agree with each of the roster options. So whilst we both accept that some of the principles move, they don't necessarily agree with roster options. And finally, management accept in the equality impact assessment impact grid, which is right at the end of the paper, that on page 46, I think it is, it's step 4 of the impact grid at least, where we say that partners may undertake caring responsibilities, we ought also to have made it clear that in cases of things like lone parents, single parents, that wouldn't be the case, and that will form part of the action plan, and we completely accept that. So I just wanted to make those points of clarification before we move to the presentation. So I will now hand over to Keith to make the recommendations to the board.
Thank you. And this presentation is being streamed, Keith, so
Yes.
people who are watching us online, including staff, obviously members of the public, can see the presentation.
I understand. Thank you. So firstly, what we're going to cover today is the context of why we need to go through this exercise, outline how the consultation was conducted and how the consultation process has improved the proposals, review what has been agreed and what has not been agreed. I'll then summarise the recommendations and explain what that will mean for the organisation for the future. So our context for why we embarked on this exercise is that we're moving into a period of change, facing significant commercial competition for the first time on our core activity. To enable us to maintain a viable organisation in the future in which jobs are secure and patient demand is met, whilst maintaining the quality of care we provide and meeting our commercial imperatives, we have to operate to some minimum benchmarks in how we roster our staff to deliver an efficient business that can compete for and win and successfully operate one-on-one contracts. The way we currently roster our frontline staff to meet our patient demand is unsustainable to those challenges. Very aware that this is not the first time that the organisation has embarked on a roster consultation, so previous actions to resolve this have been limited by the proportion of staff with individual restrictions. That's currently circa 49% of staff, 674 staff. So in effect, on top of our standard roster colour options of about 13, we have another 674 individual roster arrangements. Previously, when the organisation did this, we felt that there would be more people voluntarily relinquishing their restrictions than ended up being the case.
Yeah.
And when we embarked on this previously, we felt that we would be able to recruit to fill any gaps, and that wasn't possible at the time. The changing call profile for 111 is beginning to emerge, and this is a different call profile to our 0845 business. It is much more in the out of hours, so the weekday evenings, weekend days and weekend evenings period, than our 0845 businesses currently. And so we need quite a fundamental change to meet all these new challenges. And the transition to 111, where as things stand we're not certain of which 111 business we will win, which 111 business we will not win, and what that will mean for the corresponding drop-off in 0845 and how successful 111 will be with the public, means that our ability to forecast our call volumes over the next 12-18 months is very, very difficult. Therefore, we need agility and flexibility with our staff to be able to adapt to that changing profile as it becomes more clear. Some further context for you. Our roster inefficiency, it's a mathematical calculation, but it's currently at 75%. The ideal within a large contact centre business is 95%. Okay, the minimum benchmark that you would seek to operate at is 90%, and our current proposals are aimed at getting us just to the 90% point, not to the 95, just to the 90% point. And to give us some financial context to that, our frontline staffing budget is in the order of £60 million a year, and our 20% inefficiency is costing us £12 million a year, or £1 million a month. That's the gap from 75% to 95%. Some examples of how our current rostering impacts on our ability to deliver service. This is an example of a Tuesday. The lines above the middle line of 0 are where we are overstaffed. and those under are where we are understaffed, and that is a typical Tuesday. Saturdays is much more stark. So on a Saturday, on the next slide, we are typically understaffed. This relates to nurses, not health advisors. We are typically understaffed by up to 60 staff at points on a Saturday, and the pattern is similar for other days of the week.
Was Tuesday nurses or health
Tuesdays
advisors?
nurses.
Was nurses
With
as
health
well?
advisors, we have a bit more flexibility because we're able to use our in-sourced arrangements to plug significant gaps, where we don't have currently that flexibility to that extent with our nurse population. So what we proposed at the start was that we would remove the standard working practices framework. We would replace scheduling guidelines. We would replace with scheduling guidelines and operating principles. That we would remove individual restrictions. We would update and revise the roster option choices. That the roster choices would no longer be contractual. That we would have the flexibility to change an advisor's roster pattern within 4 weeks, and the flexibility to change their roster colour within 13 weeks on an individual basis without going into collective consultation. The engagement through the consultation process. So consultation launched back in August and ran for 111 days to 8th of November. There was a further extension for TAL to the end of last week.
Tells the appointments
The
line.
appointments line. There were various roadshows, so a launch by divisional teams, groups and one-to-one discussions. There were midpoint roadshows, which just about everybody around the table has attended a number of. There was a collective consultation group formed, and that was the vehicle for the formal consultation with staff side representatives. All staff were offered a one-to-one, so 1,018 staff took up the offer. Everybody that requested a one-to-one has had a one-to-one. In total, 700 staff attended 37 roadshow events, and there have been 8 two-hour meetings with staff side representatives in the collective consultation group. And it's fair to say that the recommendations have been approved by the quality of the engagement that we've had with staff side. There are a number of areas of agreement. New working rules to replace the standard working practices, the development of a national shift swap system in place prior to the launch of new rosters. We've agreed 12 hours between the end of one shift and the start of the next. Removal of restrictions as a principle, but with an awareness of our obligations under Equalities Act. A revised flexible working policy. Definition of a shift start time and roster selection criteria. We've also agreed that staff will be scheduled by site as far as possible, and towards the end of the process we've reached agreement, as Roger alluded to at the beginning, on breaks. Time off in lieu will be accrued from the first minute at the end of the shift, and we will enhance the availability of bank options.
So what does that mean?
So, where we are proposing that we have a minimum contracted hour per week, for example, of 15 hours, there will be the option for staff to work on the bank if they wish to work less than our contracted minimum.
Bank is a bit of NHS jargon. It refers to a bank of staff who have a 0 hours contract.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And are in effect an in-house agency. That's the effect of it, but it's commonly called bank in the NHS.
Areas which are not agreed, there are about 8 in total, and we're going to come on to each one of those particularly. So, reflection time is a not ready reason code. So within the telephony system, an agent would always be in a particular state. They will either be waiting for a call, talking to a patient, in after call work, on a break, in training, etc. There is another code which is the reflection code, reflection time at the end of the shift, which is currently about 10 minutes. Our recommendation is that staff should remain available to take calls to the end of their shift, that staff will be paid for the time that they work, And again, to give some context to reflection time, it's currently costing us an extra 38 FTE. So it's costing us over £1 million a year. The raw figure is about 870,000 on the median point salary, not fully loaded. So by the time we add in NI, etc., it's well over £1 million a year. We understand the staff side position to be that reflection time should remain. I would let them speak for that, I think. That's okay. The next point is standard weekly and minimum contract hours. So we are proposing to standardise the contract hours and shift lengths, and the next slide alludes to what they are. This improves our ability to have an efficient and effective planning process and meet our 90% minimum roster efficiency. We're proposing that 3 shifts is the minimum that staff would work, except for a weekend roster where 2 shifts of 7.5 can apply. We understand the staff side position to be that there should be no minimum number of hours or days. Bit of a detail on this slide, but essentially these are the shifts that we are proposing, and again these have improved through the consultation process and from the board seminar. So we're proposing that there can be 2 7.5-hour shifts across the weekend, 3 7.5-hour shifts. An area of contention was the 22.5-hour working week, but we are now proposing to allow that with the proviso that 2 of those shifts are across the weekend when we most need them. A 3 bunch of 5-hour shift or a 4 by 5-hour shift to give us a 15 or 20-hour week, and as we currently have 4 7.5-hour shifts and the full-time 5 7.5-hour shifts. The night shifts are essentially 9 or 9.5 hours to make up the 37.5. We're also proposing that we discontinue the 16-hour shifts and all shifts of less than 15 hours. And that, as Nick alluded to earlier, there will be flexible options for staff that aren't able to work that minimum contract. The definition of weekend, we're proposing to define as defined by Agenda for Change, which is midnight on Friday to midnight on Sunday. We understand staff side position to be any shift from 6 PM on a Friday and any shift past midnight on a Sunday night. Bank holidays, we are proposing that staff may be required to work all bank holidays. The important point, we recommend that all bank holidays be treated as exceptional. That is, that staff may be moved from their normal roster pattern to meet the exceptional demand, where we typically receive between 60 and 100% additional call volume on the bank holiday. We understand staff side position to be that staff will not have to work all bank holidays and that standard shifts should apply. Roster release, as I alluded to earlier, one of the reasons for us doing this is to give us flexibility and agility with the new challenges that we face. So we are proposing that rosters are released 4 weeks in advance. Gives us the flexibility to adapt to changing call volume. Staff side are requesting that rosters are released 8 weeks in advance. And it's fair to say that we agree that that is an aspiration that we should seek to move to over time, but don't believe that that works for the organisation currently until call demands are more known. With regard to pay protection, we're proposing that where agreement to a new contract hour cannot be reached, that we would terminate and re-engage. This would apply, for example, to somebody that is currently on 24 hours a week contract. We are proposing that they would move up to 30. If they're not able to do that and need to move down to 22.5, we are proposing that we would terminate and re-engage without pay protection. The staff side position is that pay protection should still apply.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes.
If you had somebody working 24 at the moment and they wanted to move down to 22.5, or they had to, could they work the other 1.5 as part of the bank? Is that possible?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. Can I take that away?
Yeah. Thank you.
Unless Roger or Mike have.
That's too technical for me as well, Steve.
Okay. Right, thank you.
I mean, the answer is yes in principle, but it's a question of
It's whether 1.5
can you fit
hours would be
1.5 hours
realistic.
into the
I think we have the
into
mechanism,
the rostering point.
The
That's
principle of
the
the
point.
mechanisms to do it.
Principle's okay.
Okay, so what do the management recommendations deliver? This delivers us marginally over, it's about 90.3% efficient schedule fit for nurse advisors and health advisors if all the recommendations are adopted. Each percentage point below that 90% minimum costs us in excess of £500,000 per year. We can't achieve it for dental nurses and health information advisors because they're such a small cohort. The numbers don't show that. Our proposal for implementation is that implementation of the final decisions will begin immediately after board approval and should complete at the end of Q1 2012. And the current plan is that first new rosters will be worked from 27th of March 2012. Offline time for planned activities such as training, one-to-one, group huddles, etc. will be centrally scheduled and controlled through the management of schedule adherence. Flexible working applications will be considered by a central body, ensuring that we have national consistency. A process for national shift swaps will be in place for that go-live date. And the improved bank offer, so more choice for staff who wish to work less than 15-hour minimum contracts. So what will that deliver? What will the future look like? A better service for all patients, whereas currently we're having to prioritise the most urgent cases due to some limitations we have with staff scheduling. Obviously allows us to be more efficient with our scheduling. It will lead to lower contract penalties. It will give us adaptable scheduling rules and guidelines as we go into the 111 world. The contract will be clearer for all parties. There will be a smaller number of staff with a restricted roster, so smaller than the 674 that we currently have. And in general, the roster options will be balanced in line with the demands of patients on the service. And essentially our capacity will be moved to more of the out of hours period, and it improves our ability to match staffing to patient demand. And those are the recommendations to the board.
Thank you, Keith. That was very clear. I'm sure there are questions and observations people would like to make, but what I would suggest is we hold those over until we've heard from our staff side representatives. So before I ask, so Maria, you're going to go first. I'd just like to thank the staff side for the constructive engagement through the process. I think we've heard on several occasions that recommendations and ideas from staff have helped us improve and refine the recommendations. So that's been a very helpful process, and we understand there are obviously the areas that Keith described where agreement hasn't been reached. So Maria, would you like to go first in speaking to the board, to the assembled masters?
We value this opportunity to address the board regarding our future workforce consultation.
Can you speak up a little bit, Maria?
Sorry, is that a bit better?
Yeah, just try and project a little bit. Yeah.
No, standing is easier for me, sorry. The board should remember why we launched Rostering Revolutions in 2009. It was because rosters were the hottest issue with staff. It was one of the things they said they were leaving the organisation for, and when we asked staff what we could do to make their life better, it was changing the rosters. They wanted to be able to plan their lives outside of work. They wanted to be able to say yes, they could go to a school play, a wedding, or take a relative to hospital. And those rosters were given 8 weeks in advance. So Rostering Revolution was born, and although at first staff were unhappy with it, it did deliver the planned 80% roster cover and a work-life balance for the frontline staff. On a whole, staff were contented with the rosters. Since then, our core profile and staffing has changed, and staff side accepted that there were too many restrictions and had agreed to zero them very early in the consultation. Throughout the consultation, we argued that those staff who will be in orange, yellow and red to have some security, at least to know when their days off were going to be. We are sorry to say that the revised proposal didn't give any security of knowing your days off, and staff will only get to know their roster 4 weeks ahead. We feel this will result in an increase in flexible working requests, so childcare and other caring arrangements can be arranged. The staff who need to regularly visit a consultant and physio will not be able to arrange appointments in advance. And although we are going to have shifts swapping facility, this will increase the stress on the staff. Silver is the only opportunity that allows staff to have some control on their working life. This option is not open to any staff who have health needs or carer responsibilities that affect their availability. Management has said about us not about the 10 minutes reflection time, and have said that staff should be ready to take calls to the end of their shift. We do that now. Whilst in an 05 code, we can still be called up by the shift managers to take a call in an emergency situation. That time, though, is used not just to sit, but to read emails, to do the tidying of the desk, ensuring that it's clean and safe for the next person to come and sit in there, and also to fill out admin things like your timesheet. Whilst we understand we need to streamline the number of contracted hours, we are concerned that we will lose the frontline staff that we can ill afford to. From a survey we have done of staff affected, only 1% of the respondents said they had another job, and the majority of those were coal handlers. A significant majority said that they could financially ill afford to do the extra shift, with the extra care costs, transport costs, and also taking home less money. Although the recommendations say there is a wide varied option of rosters, with no security of when your days are in orange, yellow and red month by month, and no availability for you to go into silver, we would ask for a high majority of our staff, where are the wide varied revised roster patterns? On bank holidays, we have proposed throughout the consultation and said it again at the seminar that if part-time staff may be expected to work the same bank holidays as full-time staff, that it should only be fair that they also receive the same allowance for bank holidays added to their annual leave. Throughout the consultation, we raised the issue of shrinkage on the modelling, to be informed by Jill Kemp that she had only been asked to model on efficiency. When we raised this at the last consultation meeting, we were informed that capacity was another piece of work. We have concerns because rosters have not been modelled with the baseline shrinkage as identified on page 11 of management's recommendation paper. The time lost is not insignificant. It equates to 359 whole-time equivalent hours per month, or 90 whole-time equivalent per week across all staff groups. Because of this, combined with attrition, we feel NHS Direct will find it increasingly difficult to recruit and retain staff to enable us to hit the patient-centred targets.
I'd just like to echo what Joanne said at the beginning of this, and it's really important we do get this right, and staff side, as you said, throughout the consultation, we have engaged, and we came from the point of view that restrictions were zero from that point of view. We do have great concern that in terms of looking at colleague here, Helen mentioned about being a great place to work and the impact that this consultation is going to have on that risk. We're very pleased to hear from Roger's input here that the organisations now recognise that there are single parents working in the organisation as far as the impact assessment was concerned. But there is great concern that this is leading to a lot of casualisation of the staff. If you're going to rely on bank staff to pick up the fewer hours that aren't going to be available, there's There's no job security for the staff in working on a bank and having a 0 hours contract. And we're talking in an environment where, as the RCN have said this month, 20,000 NHS staff have lost their jobs in a month, 100,000 public sector jobs have gone in 3 months. And that's the context that the staff in NHS Direct are going through this consultation. We're also very concerned about the appointments line staff. The extension to the consultation for that group of staff was welcomed, but the proposal that's been put forward and the specific roster developed for that discrete service, who work very different hours to the core service, does not give them any choice, we feel. They've lost the opportunity to highlight if they need a day off. They have at the moment the preferencing system. They can say for a nativity play for appointments, as Marie was saying. They will not be allowed that in the proposal for that group of staff, and we feel they're being discriminated against the rest of the staff for that reason. Also, we're concerned the loss of the TAL staff do 6-hour shifts. There's no provision for 6-hour shifts in this proposal. Health information, again, another discrete part of the organisation. It's been recognised, as Keith said, that because they're a very small group of staff, because of economies of scale, it's difficult to get the full efficiency of 90% when you're rostering dental nurses' health information. We would propose that to get us to 2012, where there's greater uncertainty beyond, 2013, beyond 2013 there is great uncertainty with the health information service. We would propose that they have an interim roster to protect that service, but also be used on the core as they are currently when necessary. And also finally, this is about covering the out of hours period. We're all in agreement to that. We all recognise, the figures are coming through more and more that 111 is an out of hours service. Do have concern when you're talking about the 15-hour staff still staying on 7.5-hour contracts and the 22.5-hour people being allowed to do it over 3 days, that we're fixating on the weekend part of the out of hours. Why can't those people on those contracts be considered for the other parts of the out of hours period? That's what we would say. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandra. Gary.
Just to finish off, we have to stress that trade unions and staff do really appreciate the difficulty NHSD has got at this time. You're facing 2 ways. You've got to maintain your core service because you've got penalty clauses coming all the time. So you've got to be able to be flexible to deal with that. But you're also facing in the very near future is that bidding for 1-1 services, and it is a very awkward time for you to bid. So we do really see that. And I think that we did try to bring something positive to the table. And I think I would hope that the board see that there have been significant steps made to come to an agreement, and there have been some painful decisions that staff side have had to make to actually take members there towards where you're actually able to have that dialogue. However, what I would like to see is that the board give due consideration to the paper that they put forward as a counter proposal to the board seminar some weeks ago before making your final decision, because I think if you look at that and look at the information that Keith and Roger have produced here along with mine, you will see there is a workable solution to the issues that were made, and there is also potential solutions to some of the non-areas agreements that we have. So I would urge the board to give those due consideration. I would also urge the board to really consider what's in the equality impact assessment, because it does paint quite a negative picture of some of the potential impacts for individuals working for the organisation, but also for the organisation themselves to bear in mind when they go through that change process. And I think those have to be treated seriously and borne in mind before you come to a final decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. I should have mentioned actually that one of the important inputs to this process was the staff side paper, which was distributed before the board seminar. So we have had that, and we have had time to read it and consider it. Okay. I think I would then like to move to a general discussion, unless Mike, you have anything you want to add? No. Sure, that's fine. Roger, would you like to...
Can I just deal with one point, and that is that the extension of the appointments line part of this consultation has led to an alternative proposal from staff side that we haven't fully considered, and that any recommendations on the appointments line rostering will come to the December board meeting.
Yes, so we should clarify
should
that,
have-
Sandra.
put
We
that
heard
to
what you
the
had to
side,
say,
really.
but we won't be discussing the appointments line recommendations today. We need to do that after the extended consultation period. I know it's just finished, but you know, it has been
We haven't-
considered. Yeah.
Just want to go back to that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? I mean, I've got a few points I'd like to raise, but maybe somebody else would like to go first.
I just want to ask one question about the roster efficiency, if I may. There's a lot of conversations about with the staff when I've been around has been about, well, let's get it done and let's not come back for any more hiatus, as it were, into the system. Now you're going for 90%. Why not 95%? That's what I just wanted to understand why it was considered that we wouldn't go for that level.
The leap to 95% would be extremely unpalatable on all sides. It would involve a very large percentage of our staff being required to be fully flexible. Being required to be fully flexible, and that's too far to go, we believe. And there are organisations that run at 95% if you are selling mobile phones, etc., but we also believe that we will lose elements of what makes NHS Direct what it is.
So Keith, I mean, I think what we learned as we were able to spend the really substantial time focusing on this in our board seminar was that you've all the time been trying to balance the additional element of roster efficiency we get from a particular recommendation and the, if you like, pain and cost to staff.
Yes.
And each one of those has been carefully thought through, and some recommendations have been made. And what you're saying is that it was just too tough. We felt that it was too much to ask staff to get us to 95%, however desirable that might be from an efficiency point of view.
So it is a commercial judgment as well about competitors and how we will place ourselves within the market. Okay, I mean, I just wanted to be certain I understood that. That's fine.
Steve?
It's really a question on this roster release period.
Mm-hmm.
I have some sympathy with the request that the 4-week release period is, can be quite difficult for people who need to plan a little bit more ahead. What would need to be right for us to be able to improve on that from 4 to something? I mean, what's the impact on
it
the
would need to
business?
go from 4 to 8 to 12 because rosters are producing 4-week bundles. So you wouldn't be able to go from 4 to 6, for example. It'd be 4 to 8.
Why not?
Because rosters are releasing 4-week patterns.
Technically, why can't you go from 4 to 6? I mean, I'd like to understand what the impact is on the business actually if we kept them at 8. I mean, or the patient.
The impact on the business is inability to change to meet a change in profile in that time. It's about our agility and our flexibility.
And were you able to translate that into roster efficiency points, if you like?
No, it's
not
a
that
slightly
nature.
different calculation.
Okay. I think that release point's a very important one. I'd just like to ask a question before I bring my exec.
I was building on that point, but I'm very happy
Well,
to.
I'd like to add an additional question into the mix. So does that mean that a member of staff, for example, planning a holiday, is only able to be certain about when they're going to have the time off 4 weeks in advance?
In theory, yes.
Yeah.
In reality, it is intended that people's pattern won't change unless we absolutely have to change it. So in reality, their 4-week block will be the same in 8 weeks and 12 weeks and 16 weeks as the first 4 weeks. But it just gives us the ability to do it if we need to.
And you book annual leave.
Okay, and I was going to say, how does that affect annual leave? So annual leave can be booked
completely
separate. So I could book my annual leave months in advance. Okay, that's really important. Thank you. I wasn't clear about that. I know, Roger, you wanted to say something else.
I think it's a cup half full or cup half empty description. The cup half full says, whilst we retain the the right to vary with 4 weeks' notice. Our aspiration is to vary at 8 weeks or maybe even longer, and that in reality, the proportion of days that will get changed for staff will be very few. That is a cup half full way of describing what is proposed. So we are exploring what is required in the extreme, but in practice we'll find something different in reality that gets borne out. The cup half empty way of describing it is people will only get their 4 weeks, and that's what they'll always get. And just occasionally it might not be as bad as that. So both things are describing the same, and it may well be that in the way that we actually implement this, in view of the actual changes that we see in our call profiles next year, that we're less in the kind of washing machine of change and it's more predictable, then we'll be able to be much more sparing in our use of what you might regard as short-term flexibility requirements. And the problem I think we've got is, I don't want to make a long speech, but I think it's borne out in the reflection time discussion. I think essentially we agree. It's how it's described and how the level of trust that exists about how this will actually be used in practice gets borne out. And that's my characterisation of this, that in this particular 4 weeks is a very good example of it. I think the reflection time is another, where we're having to draw a line that appears draconian, but in practice won't be.
Okay, thank you. Roger.
And I'd just like to build on the 4 week. Both Keith and Nick have said that we have an aspiration for that period to be longer. But we have to accept that we're entering a period of profound uncertainty in the call volumes that this organisation will be taking over the next 16 or 17 months. We would expect those volumes to start to become more predictable as 111 beds in. And as that happens, we would expect to be able to predict what our staffing needs are and then go further out with things like roster release. So our aspiration remains to be further out than 4 weeks. But what we cannot do is have to go back into a 90-day consultation with our staff every time we need to change the way we run our rosters. And I think that's the real, in a way, that's the key to this whole thing. We're entering a period of profound change.
Does anyone else have a comment or question? Helen?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the bank offer. For those who can't work more than 15 hours, bearing in mind what Nick said, it's a 0 hours contract,
yes,
and there's no requirement on the employer to give those hours or for the employee to take those.
yes.
How is that going to impact on those? Are they going to be able to be offered, those hours?
Again, the way it's written might sound draconian, but in reality, we are already utilising bank extensively. So the reality may be, in theory, we may not offer any hours, and in theory, the staff may not be able to work or choose not to take up those hours. But in reality, we are utilising the bank option extensively, and even over the weekend, letters have gone out to all our current people on bank, asking them what they can do for us over the winter pressures period. So the reality is that we use bank extensively as one of our key levers.
Okay, can I just ask one question that goes into that?
Yes, and then I think Sandra wants to make a comment about that.
Also, in relation to bank contracts, how does that affect their contractual rights, bearing in mind they were permanently employed,
probably one for Roger
in relation to continuous employment from a pension point of view, but also from employee rights?
That will be, we will be offering a series of contracts, and if somebody chooses not to take that contract and to go on to the bank, then that will be their choice.
Okay. Sandra, did you want to say something about bank use?
I think it does need clarifying, because as you say, bank is an NHS term, and someone who has actually run a nurse bank in an acute hospital setting, it's very clear, the board to understand, as Helen has clarified for you, that it is a 0 hours
Yes.
contract.
Yeah.
There's no obligation on the organisation
Yes.
to offer those hours. There's no obligation on the member of staff to take those
Yes.
hours.
Yes.
And I'd just like to go back to something that was said by Keith about the bank. I would just. I think that to say that we utilise the bank a little. I can't remember what you just said, Keith.
Extensively.
Extensively.
Or are beginning to.
Well, extensively, I think is a cup half full, to use Nick's expression. We do have Nurse Bank. It's been recognised with this consultation that it needs to be more robust and more organised, and again, to do with the national organisation. But there's agency nurses as well. We need to make the distinction between the agency nurses and the people who are bank, because if they're bank, they're NHS employees in terms of pension and just talked about. And there's no security of employment if you are a member of bank staff.
That's right.
Staff.
That's right.
I wish the board to understand.
Nick?
Can I just build on the bank point, because I wouldn't want you as staff side or for the board as a whole to think that we are somehow dressing this up to be the same as permanent employment on a regular contracted hours. I'm absolutely clear it's not. But I think what it does do, in my judgment, again, having been long involved in operating bank arrangements in the NHS, that, for example, somebody who values their ability to be sure about what day they will not be working, or who values their ability to choose whether to work on a particular bank holiday or not, if they value that certainty more than the regularity of work week in, week out, and the certainty of work week in and week out, it is an option for them to take. And I'm not seeking to say that that's going to suit everybody, but I think our obligation as an organisation, when we are having to make a difficult choice about cutting down very part-time hours because they simply don't work with the efficiency levels that we require in the future, that we make a very user-friendly, staff-friendly offer in terms of how bank can work for people to choose as one of the options. But I'm not trying to dress it up and say it's the same as a 10-hour a week regular contract, because it isn't.
Thank you, Nick. Tim?
Changing tack slightly. I don't know enough about this paid protection issue to really draw a conclusion, I don't think. Do we have any dimensions around how extensive that might be and what that might cost? And are there precedents elsewhere in the NHS?
So I'll let Roger answer the main points of that. We did some modelling on those that. So when this issue first arose, we weren't proposing a 22.5-hour contract. For example, we were proposing 20 or 30. So we did some modelling on, if we asked everybody on 22.5 hours to now only work 20, what does that 2.5 hours for everybody equate to? And it's about £900,000.
Oh boy.
We are now offering a 22.5-hour contract, however, with some changes, but just that 2.5 hours was about £900,000. I'll let Roger answer more.
Partly because of that, we will be offering contracts that increase people's hours, not that decrease them, because we have a policy that includes pay protection for 3 years if we decrease those hours.
3 years?
And that would be prohibitive of us being able to take that approach.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to make an observation, and I'm going to ask the board whether the board feels they have enough information now to make a decision on this. So I'd like to just make an observation about reflection time. It seems to me that in a casual minimum wage environment, it's reasonable to say that the bell goes at the end of your shift and you down tools and you walk away. But in a kind of professional environment that we work, the tidying of the desk and the little bits of admin seem to me to be the sorts of things that one reasonably does after the bell has gone. And I think that I have confidence in our staff and their sort of professionalism that they would be prepared to do that, especially now we've said that we'll pay for telephone calls that go, for every minute after the end of the shift, and that feels to me, I know these things are all difficult, but that feels to me to be not unreasonable. And I'm glad that we've moved on that, and I think that seems okay to me. That's me outside of the chair making an observation. All right, so I'd now like to ask the board whether they have explored sufficiently in seminar, in being out and about, and in listening to reading all the various papers and listening to the presentation and the comments today, whether they have enough information to make a decision. Tim, I'd just like to ask you, you haven't had an opportunity to contribute to the conversation. Have you heard enough?
Yes, I think I have, although I think by missing out, unfortunately, on the board the seminar and the consultation, I'm not entirely clear what has been asked and what has been explored beforehand. I think what's been presented today is very helpful, and what I learned from having out on one of the consultations was helpful too.
Good, thank you very much. Does anyone else feel that they need any more information in order to make a decision on this? Okay, I would like to ask the board then whether we are going to accept the management recommendations for the outcome of the consultation on the future workforce. Is there anybody who is not happy to accept the management recommendations, recognising the difficult trade-offs that we've had to make, recognising that this is a significant change for many of our staff? Okay. I'm not hearing anyone who dissents from the recommendations, so as a board I think we have accepted those, and with a sensitivity, I hope, to the impact on staff, that's the direction we're going to take. Thank you very much. Okay.
I just wanted to add one.
Please.
Could I?
Please, yeah.
It's just that obviously this 8-week problem with having a roster. I do sympathise with this because of other places where I'm involved with operating rostering. And you did mention it as being a management aspiration. I would like to think we could write that in some way, so that we could come back to it to hear from you how far you've got with perhaps enabling that to happen.
Yes, and I think that's very helpful, Peter. And I'd also like to, when we look at that, if we can have some data on how many people have been asked to change days within 4 weeks. I mean, but in the 8 weeks to 4 weeks period, so that we can have a sense of are we meeting the kind of aspiration that Nick described, or are we more in a situation where people are being asked to change their days in a shorter period than 8 weeks?
In terms of managing dates on that, realistically that's going to be May before the first 2 chunks of 4 weeks would have happened, so that'll be the first time that we'll be able to.
That may even be a little bit soon.
Yes,
you might want to let it
that's
bed
the earliest
down
we
a
will
bit.
be able to
Okay,
do.
but let's formalise that and put that in as something that the board has agreed.
Are we
Yes?
just mentioned about implementation, or is that?
Yeah,
Can
please
I mention
do.
something?
Yeah.
I just want to say I was very. I think the important thing about this proposition now is to get on with it, because people will want. I mean, much as some of it is not palatable to some people, the important thing is that sensitively as you can, you get on with it. But I noticed that you have a staff side member on the implementation team. I mean, I welcome that. I think that's enlightened to have that. The key thing, though, is that implementation team is charged with getting on with it. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah. I'm sure we agree with that, Peter. Thank you. Nick?
I wanted just to end up by saying a couple of things. Firstly, to say that it will be our approach to continue to work closely with staff side representatives, and whilst we may well say to ourselves that we have difficult trade-offs to make, I know so do they. Our collective intent is to implement these proposals in a sensitive and appropriate way, and not in a kind of rules is rules or taking sides, who's won, who's lost type of way. and that will mean that we'll have to continue to work at our communication and our collective approach with you, because the loser out of us taking sides on this will be our staff. Because if we are unable to meet our performance requirements, if we're unable to meet the levels of confidence about costs that will give us the ability to win contracts, then ultimately it will be staff who will lose out in terms of the viability of the organisation. So the spirit is to work collectively to a sensitive implementation, recognising that all parties in it, staff side and management side, have got trade-offs that we have to bear in mind. So thank you for your support so far, and we look forward to it continuing.
And also before you is the corporate events calendar for 2012-13. I've spoken with the regional and the chairs of the committee meeting about the dates, just to confirm everyone's okay with them, and I'll be sending out invitations after the meeting. That's fine.
Thanks, Keisha. So we've got a couple of clinical governance sets of minutes. So there's one set of minutes and one feedback from the November meeting. Steve, I understand you volunteered to stand in for Sue on that. If I could ask you to be particularly
very
succinct.
brief. There were five substantive issues. One was around the urgent and emergency referrals target, which at the moment is supposed to be less than 25%. We're missing that target, but it's felt that the actual level is appropriate. So for next year, there's going to be a discussion around what that target ought to be, and hopefully renegotiated. There will be a strategy update given to the January committee meeting. Meningitis case review. Scope and exercise work is now complete, but we discovered there's no benchmarking standards set for the NHS, so part of the wider project will include the development of these. Service quality review programme update and action log. The outstanding actions are being reviewed and reprioritised by the exec, and a further update will come to the January meeting. Safeguarding children. The annual Safeguarding Children report was presented, summarising the activity for 10-11 and also Q1 to of 11-12. One outcome was that the relevant executives will explore and confirm the adequacy of dedicated safeguarding staffing in place to manage this activity.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Steve? I'd just like to say I think the idea of developing some meningitis benchmarks is a really good one. I think that would be a very good outcome from that piece of work. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. I think we have some... Tricia, are you going to talk about the serious incidents report that went to the Clinical Governance Committee?
I haven't planned to, Chair. It was presented, the Clinical Governance Committee reviewed it. We have reviewed them separately, both outside of the meeting and in the meeting, and all actions have been implemented that have arisen from that report.
Good, thank you. That's good to hear. We've got some minutes from the Audit Committee and from minutes from the Finance Committee. I guess since we've got the minutes, we don't necessarily need to talk about them unless anyone has any questions on them.
Reported last.
Yeah, so we reported orally last time, now we've got the minutes. Okay, good. That's fine then. We can move then forward into our stakeholder engagement section. I have taken a chair's action, and I've asked the people who have been on engagement visits in the last couple of weeks. Oh, well, look back on that. It was so quick you missed it. I've asked the people who've been on recent engagement visits to hold off on their feedback, partly because Trevor Jones isn't with us today and because Tim's on the phone. And both of those people have been out and about, Tim Heyman, I mean. So we're going to hold those and have a special bumper Christmas edition of Trust Engagement Visits, by which time actually Roger and I will have been out to visit a 111 service, which I'm very much looking forward to. Okay, so that leaves us, I think, just with the patient call recordings, which I really would like to discuss. So, first of all, I'll ask my normal question. Is there anybody around the table who has not had the opportunity to listen to these calls? Okay, Steve, Ruth, Alan, Helen. Okay, so there are a few of us who have. You haven't, Keith. Okay. So let's try and get our comprehensiveness up a bit on this. As you know, I really think it's important that we do talk about real patient experience around this table. Although everything we do is about the service we do for patients, it's obviously a lot of what we're doing here is several steps removed from actually what gets delivered on the front line. I certainly had some questions I'd like to raise about this particular one. Trish, would you just like to quickly introduce it and give the context so that people can understand what it is we're talking about?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The 4 voice recordings that were presented to the board this month were relating to a single patient experience in the out of hours period. It was regarding an elderly adult who was resident in a residential home who was experiencing some breathing difficulties and some serious health concerns, and the carer within the residential home was ringing the GP out of hours service to seek some urgent medical attention for that resident. The first call came into the service and was handled by a health advisor and subsequently passed on to a nurse within our service with the agreement to pass the call to the out of hours provider. This was undertaken with a caveat of the carer expressing a request from the family of the patient themselves that they were not referred to an emergency endpoint and transported via the ambulance service to hospital. They wished any emergency treatment for this patient to be conducted within the residential care, the home in which the patient lived. The second 2 calls were a subsequent call into the service the next day seeking further assessment and intervention by the GP out of hours service, which was a follow-on call from the evening before. And again, the explanation of reiterating the family's request not to transport to hospital was explored. However, in the second part of this call, the nurse advisor gave a very clear rationale as to why she felt it was important that the paramedics were actually dispatched to this residential home to administer some on-site care and to undertake a face-to-face assessment of the patient's symptoms and to engage further with the carers of the resident as to the appropriateness of transportation to the hospital. In conclusion, we, through the formation of this paper for the board, we do know that the resident was transported at a point after the second call to hospital and sadly did die in hospital a number of days after admission and further treatment for the health concerns at that time.
Thank you, Trish. That's great. Okay, well, I'd like to kind of step out of the chair, as it were, and just feedback the issues that really struck me. So in those calls, I think there was one call that the quality of which wasn't what we would really want, and it was reassuring that to note from the paper the action that was taken to remove the nurse advisor from independent practice and have them supervised. I thought that was good. For me, there were 2 more sort of generic policy issues that were illustrated by this set of interactions that I wanted to ask you about. One was there was a technical failure at the time, wasn't there? And the details of the patient were faxed over to the out of hours doctor, and it transpired that the out of hours doctor didn't go back to the home. That loop was never then closed effectively, so the home called again and said, well, the doctors never came back to us. I wanted to ask, so my first question is, what procedures do we have in place, if any, to make sure that when we pass something over to the out of hours doctor, they actually do something about it and it doesn't get lost in the system? The second point was one that you raised, Tricia, which was there was at various points in the calls things were said which suggested that the family didn't want the lady to go to hospital. So at one point I think it was said the family doesn't want her to go to hospital, and one of the other carers on a later call said her daughter doesn't want her to go to hospital. And what struck me was there wasn't real clarity on our side what we do under those circumstances. So it struck me that we could have a policy which says we follow that and we document it, or we could have a policy that says we don't unless there's a palliative care plan or something. It just struck me that the people on the phone didn't really know what to do, whether they were downgrading it from a 999 because of what had been said. And of course there's always the worry that maybe they're not talking about this patient, but it's the patient in the room next door, and they've got confused, or that the daughter feels like this, but the 6 sons feel something else. You just don't know that. And what really struck me was the contrast between something that I'd very recently read in the West Yorkshire Urgent Care Service, where the external people who talked with staff in West Yorkshire said every single person they spoke to was absolutely clear about safeguarding issues. They knew what to do, and when something came up, the procedure was very clear, which I thought was excellent. What struck me here was I didn't get a sense from listening to the calls that we were really clear about how we should react to that assertion that the family didn't want this lady to go to hospital. Those are the two things that struck me.
Okay. If I may respond, on the first health advisor within the call, where I believe the main issues arose was a new employee to our organisation, and I think our more experienced health advisors would have sought clinical support through the help desk in those circumstances. And I think the report actually does identify there are a number of lessons for that individual health advisor's learning. There is first of all, a clear process in which our staff are trained. And it's very much, it does raise the principles of living wills and us having appropriate care plans and special patient notes that are shared from one provider to another. And in this call there had actually been reference to this elderly lady had some health problems over the ensuing months, and that was clearly documented by the GP in a case note that was shared with us as an organisation. If that had been the case, our staff are absolutely able to adhere to the principles of what that special note says, which would be please refer to GP out of hours as an emergency rather than transportation through that emergency process. The next point was there is absolutely a procedure to follow when there is a failure of what we call the technical link. So in the call, the board will recall there was reference to I will fax this call over. That isn't the print a piece of paper and literally feed it through a fax machine. There is a closed technical process which allows our nurse or health advisor to seamlessly send that patient record through to the out-of-hours provider. And through lessons learned from other serious untoward incidents, we also the faxing process is the same virtually as the technical link process, so we don't necessarily follow that call up with a phone call because that causes other undue pressures on the out-of-hours provider trying to deal with the influx of patient records when the technical systems are down. So there is a process for that, which I believe the nurse advisor did follow in that call.
But we don't close the loop. So once it's gone over to the out-of-hours provider, it sounds...
It's a referral.
Yeah, it's a referral.
It's a referral, yeah. What I didn't hear, or I can't remember hearing on that call, is the safety elements of our call closure, which we usually complete with, for our out-of-hours providers, is the out-of-hours surgery will be in touch with you within a specific period of time, and should you not have contact, call us back, as well as the next stage, which is, and if the patient's condition should deteriorate or you are furtherly concerned, please do call us back. I can't recall them though.
The final nurse who spoke was, fantastically clear, and
absolutely
all of those
crystal
things.
clear.
Could just to follow up on the closing the loop discussion. I think what we aspire to, certainly what I aspire to, but I'll defer to Brian and Tricia, is an end-to-end view from the point of view of the contacts and the service being provided to patients from the front door all the way through to the receipt of whatever treatment it is, and that all of our governance processes, clinical governance processes, view the totality of that, and that you would be looking at a much more integrated service where each part of the chain of events, of the careful handing on of patients to the next organisation down the line, would be viewable by the totality, by everybody in the chain, because then you've got that kind of double check system in place.
And we're not going to have that for 111.
We will have that for 111.
We will have 111. That's fantastic.
In theory, 111 will provide us with exactly that opportunity, because I mean, regardless of how badly or how well NHS Direct handled this particular case, I'm very disappointed in how the NHS looked after a 98-year-old woman. I thought that was... I'm a bit shocked that the GP saw the patient 4 or 5 days before and didn't leave instructions as to how this patient was to be followed up. I don't understand why we didn't ask that if the family had made this proviso that she wasn't to be taken to hospital, the next response I would have made was, well, have you contacted the family? And so there's obviously a complete lack of clarity around the responsibility of the patient's own GP, the responsibility of the patient's family, who says, if they state or if they put in the notes she's not to be taken to hospital, then the onus is on us to say, well, this lady is now ill and you have, drawn this up, what would you like us to do? It wasn't particularly late at night, it was 9:30. I would have liked them to have spoken to the family.
Yeah, agreed.
And is that something that we can take back?
Yes.
As something that can get built into our systems?
Yes, absolutely. And through the review process and the lessons learned, that will be one of the actions taken to these members of staff, and if not already within our training programmes, though I think they are. I think it's one of those things that sometimes in the heat of dealing with these situations they do get forgotten, which is why I say with the first health advisor, if they'd had that clinical lead engagement and gone to their clinical shift lead, they would have you engaged with the family. What were the family's wishes? Are they documented? Have they been discussed with the GP? Those kind of things may well have been raised if in that first contact that had taken place.
Thanks, Brian. That's helpful. Tim.
Thanks, Joanne. I'm just echoing I'm just reading again the 111 hypothetical case, Brian. I'm not sure whether that comes up to the aspirations that you just shared.
Well, I suspect that in this case, 111 would probably... I think it probably would have handled the case slightly better in the sense that the call advisor would have finished with a speak to clinician, because there was such a lack of certainty about what to do. We weren't clear about what to do, partly because there wasn't an integrated approach to this lady's care. So, I would have hoped that if it had been speak to clinician following the 111 process, that either what was needed, in my judgment, was somebody to go and have a look at this lady. And some doctor would have gone and had a look at her, 98 years of age.
All right. Okay. As long as you're happy with that.
Tricia, why don't you respond to whatever you were interested in, and we'll move on. Yeah. Peter wants to go.
I just had to.
Let's let Peter go in first, and then you can.
I thought that was.
Oh, let's let Peter come in, then Nick, and then we'll come to you, and we'll finish it.
I thought the clinical side was very thorough. I was just going to say that obviously through the first call, there were so many different pauses with different noises and messages. You either got nothing.
Music.
You got music, or you got speak. Oh, don't hang up because you can speak to a nurse, or a combination of all of them together, which I would have been so confused with all of those different sounds. I think just hanging on, and there were other calls where there was quite a long pause of silence, and it just to me it would just confuse me and disorientate me. And I know they were talking to a carer on the other end most of the times, all the time. So maybe that's they were anxious to hang on. But if I was at home or something, I I don't know, I might have thought, I think on, but what's happening? It's just it didn't feel as together as it might be.
Nick, I'm going to take Nick's comment and then Patricia's going to come back.
Two quick comments which I know are completely obvious. The first is what an extraordinarily long-winded process it all seemed to be.
Oh, yes.
Just so much time kind of going through the motions somehow that didn't actually get to the nub of the issue, it just seemed to me. The second was what struck me was the lack of urgency and emotion from the home. This really was all in a day's work, and that underlines something I think that has been flagged before, which is when we are dealing with a caller from an institution rather than a relative, that we need to consciously inject that degree of urgency into our own response that would have been there had we been talking to that patient's daughter or son.
Well, interestingly enough, though, I mean, as I'm involved in care home businesses more generally, the arguments to care homes is they try and push people into the acute hospital sector too quickly. So, they actually react the other way, which was a surprise to me. On this occasion, they were pretty laid back about that.
Yeah.
Tricia, would you like to just help us, maybe come to Peter's point about all of the different messages?
The reason I requested these calls come to the board was to demonstrate exactly what the board have just been observing, the contrast between two different calls for one patient experience or a patient's journey within our organisation. And I often hear some of the comments regarding our openness and transparency regarding the quality of the service we provide, and I think this paper clearly demonstrates that we as an organisation openly and self-critique the service we provide to patients in that drive, that aspirant of delivering an excellent service to every single encounter. Yeah. I think the empathy within the call does give a different slant. If that was a relative, then the acuity of those patient symptoms, I think, would have been acknowledged and handled succinctly. The first call, I must reiterate, was to a new member of staff within this organisation. Taking calls, the variety and complexity of calls that come into this service are from I've just broken my fingernail and ripped it off to I am drawing my last breath and got crushing central chest pain. This member of staff was being supported, but on this occasion didn't recognise, and possibly due to the lack of empathy and the intonation within the call, the seriousness. But again, this call was passed to a clinician. The clinician in this first call was to a nurse, though, who then wanted and did pass it to the GP out of hours, which was in keeping with the family's requests. The noises and the that we could hear on the voice recording, and I think this is a real significant issue that we've not raised, is that the voice recording was to the health advisor trying to get through to the nurse. Yeah. So the tape was actually saying to the health advisor, please hang on while you are waiting for a nurse. That did take 5 minutes. That is reflective of the reasons why we've just been discussing around this table our roster options, because it was in the out of hours period, a very busy period where we know our nurses are a key resource within the organisation to help support these patients. But in conclusion, the lessons learnt from this have been fed back to the individuals involved, and again, I hope the board take the open and transparent elements of this call review in the spirit they were intended.
Thank you very much, Tricia. Okay. Very quickly then, I haven't been notified of any other business, therefore I don't propose to take any. Next meeting will be on the 19th of December at 10:30 here and online. For anyone who's still with us online, please fill in an evaluation form if you can. That would be fantastic. I'm going to draw the public session of the meeting to a close now. Those of us who are staying on, I think, will be able to grab a sandwich.